Hello, and welcome to Trans Truth, the podcast dedicated to dispelling myths, fear, and ignorance about transgender people. Along the way, we'll be sharing items of interest to the transgender community, from political and news events to health, fashion, and beauty. And now, let's have a look at some news items that should be of interest to our listeners. And welcome to Season 3 of Trans Truth. Let's start off with the news. And let's start off with a win, okay? Okay, it may turn out to be transitory, but damn it, it's a step in the right direction, and that is a win. Last week, a federal district court judge issued a preliminary injunction blocking the enforcement of a Trump administrative executive order that would have shut down access nationwide to gender-affirming health care for transgender people under the age of 19. We here at Trans Truth have pointed out over and over again that the overwhelming majority of experts in the medical, psychological, and psychiatric fields agree that gender-affirming care is essential to the health and well-being of those suffering from gender dysphoria, including pediatric patients. There is no rational reason to withhold such care. This restraining order is the result of actions brought by the American Civil Liberties Union, Lambda Legal, the ACLU of Maryland, and law firms Jenner and Block and Hogan Lovells. And speaking of wins, Democrats in the U.S. Senate have discovered that they do have a spine and have defeated a bill that, quote, would prohibit any school athletics program receiving federal funding from allowing transgender women and girls to participate in athletic programs designed for women and girls, unquote. The bill had previously passed the House with a narrow majority. We continue to observe that GOP members of the House and Senate are not all uneducated dimwits, and yet they vote like it when it comes to transgender issues. You've got to hand it to them. They have found a thing that makes fear-mongering work for them, and they are going to ride that horse into the ground. As promised, on his first day in office of his second term, President Donald Trump signed a number of executive orders. Among them was one declaring that,
as of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
The policy's official title is Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. That's an ironic mouthful coming from an adjudicated rapist and self-described molester of women. Alas, the Trump administration once again blithely disregards the guidance of experts in the field of gender identity and focuses only on biology. To be completely fair, this is a common mistake, one that one would hope would be beneath the President of the United States. But then he and his fellow Republicans have found a powerful ally in common misconceptions and ignorance. We will be spending no small amount of time this season talking about misconceptions and ignorance when it comes to gender identity, and I can promise you now that my co-host and I will have some, let's call it spirited differences of opinion on what might turn that trend around. For now, I'll just tell you that it feels weird being the optimistic one and taking the "we can do this" viewpoint. In a client alert newsletter from law firm Crowell and Mooring, the firm notes that the recent executive order defining gender as biological sex at birth has set up a legal quagmire of conflicts between local, state, and federal equal opportunity regulations. It will be an interesting 4 years as the labor attorneys lick their chops. In an interview with reporter Lauren Make of WCAU, an NBC News affiliate, Representative Sarah McBride of Delaware and the U.S. Congress's first openly transgender representative had this to say about Trump's policy attempting to deny her reality.
No executive action, no legislative action for that matter, can erase the reality of diversity across gender in our society.
But they are trying their damnedest. Oh, how they are trying. On Monday, January 27th, President Trump signed a number of executive orders addressing the United States military, including one barring transgender people from enlisting and serving openly. Predictably, the order makes assumptions and arguments that make plain the administration's utter disdain for fact, let alone principles of diversity and equality. Multiple sources are reporting that on Tuesday, January 18, U.S. District Court Judge Anna C. Reyes issued a preliminary injunction against the Trump administration over its attempt to ban transgender troops from serving in the U.S. military. Judge Reyes pulled no punches, condemning the policy as, quote, soaked in animus, unquote, and relying on language that is, quote, unabashedly demeaning, unquote, with evidence that bears no relation to fact. Wait, it gets better. This just in, as we go to press, so to speak, on Friday morning, the Trump team showed up in Judge Reyes' court with a request to dissolve the injunction. During a hearing to discuss the request, Justice Department Attorney Jean Lynn said the guidance does not target trans people per se, but people who have had symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria. Reyes immediately lost her patience. She accused the Justice Department of trying to gaslight her. Quote, I am not going to abide by government officials saying one thing to the public, what they really mean to the public, and coming in here to the court and telling me something different, like I'm an idiot. Lawyers could not answer the judge's questions about who even came up with the new rule and could not offer up any evidence that a ban on trans service members is addressing any current problem in the military. Said Judge Reyes, everything in the record is that it's a pretext for discrimination. There is nothing in the record that this was a deliberative process. Now, I am not a lawyer, but I can maybe paraphrase what Judge Reyes was saying to the legal team trying to defend their policy. What are you people, like 12 years old? Your arguments are transparent and motivated not by a desire to improve military readiness, but instead just to show the public that you hate trans people. We will, of course, be following this judicial train wreck as it unfolds, but for now, we will lean on legendary baseball broadcaster, the late, great Bob Uecker, for commentary on how it's going for Trump's grandstanding. Swing and a miss! I apologize for waxing so verbose about this case, but there is a method to my madness, and I will have more to say about this whole clusterfuck in our main segment. And finally, as has been widely reported on dozens of media outlets, on March 12th, mental 12-year-old U.S. Congressional Representative Keith Self deliberately and repeatedly misgendered his colleague, Representative Sarah McBride, during a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing. Ms. McBride is, of course, the first openly transgender woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Here's the audio of that chairman's juvenile attempt to insult his colleague.
I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Keating, also wonderful.
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat your introduction again, please?
Yes, we have set the standard on the floor of the House, and I'm simply
What is that standard, Mr. Chairman? Would you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America? Please.
I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Mr. Chairman, have you no decency? I've come to know you a little bit, but this is not decent.
We will continue this
You
hearing.
will not continue it with me unless you introduce a duly elected representative the right way.
This hearing is adjourned.
Wow. I was worried that I might be becoming a bit too inured to the juvenile level of behavior on the part of some U.S. Congress people. Clearly, that is not the case. By the way, kudos to Massachusetts Representative Bill Keating for coming to McBride's defense. Needless to say, Self's behavior is a disgraceful breach of congressional decorum, but hardly one that is new when it comes to how Republicans in that body conduct themselves these days. With few exceptions, the House GOP caucus has been reduced to a bunch of ignorant blowhards who have no idea how to govern. Indeed, many of them demonstrate daily that they don't really understand how government actually works. So here we are. Welcome to Season 3 of the Trans Truth Podcast. I am your host, Kelly Nelson. My co-host, the Reverend Dr. Jerry Ann Young, is busy with her team captain duties at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. This is, she says, her last year serving on the Midway Ticket Committee, and she promises that she will be back on the air with us shortly after the rodeo wraps up on March 23rd. Now, on a personal note, I miss Jerry Ann's presence here. Though I will wager, a better understanding of the teachings of the Christian Messiah than most so-called Christians, having a PhD-level theologian at hand to explain the finer points to this poor pagan is pretty handy. Meanwhile, I'd like to share a clip from several weeks ago. This is the Right Reverend Marianne Edgar Buddy, the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C., speaking at the National Prayer Service, which was part of Trump's inauguration.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land. May God grant us the strength and courage to honor the dignity of every human being, to speak the truth to one another in love, and walk humbly with each other and our God for the good of all people in this nation and the world. Amen.
Powerful stuff, that. We'll check with Reverend Jerry Ann when she gets back, but I'm pretty sure that Bishop Buddy has got it mostly right, especially since Trump later called her a radical left hardline Trump hater. The next day, on the Rachel Maddow show, Reverend Buddy explained her radical views.
I thought I had an opportunity, and I wanted to do it in as careful and as respectful, as grounded in our scriptures. I wasn't speaking this wasn't just my opinion. This is what we as Christians, people of faith, all the spectrums represented on that platform, these are the ideals to which we are invited to live our lives and to order our society.
Again, to this poor, godless, well, mostly godless pagan, that sounds pretty much like the way I understood that Jesus fellow taught it. Okay, I'm realizing that we have a stack of clips for this show. Okay, it's not really a physical stack of anything, this being the digital age and all, but remember, Jerry Ann and I cut our teeth in local radio back when those stations were still powered by steam engine. Each clip was recorded on a cart, short for cartridge, that looked a lot like an 8-track tape cartridge. Ask your grandparents what those were. Anyway, we'd have a stack of carts containing material for the show, including commercials, public service announcements, news spots, etc. And we'd stick them in, cue them up, and press play at the appropriate moment. So picture Aunt Kelly shoving the next cart into the machine and pressing play.
It was just a joke. The left get offended so easily. Here is an incomplete list of what offends the right. Pronouns, other people's genitals, same-sex couples, when men paint their nails, drag queens, rainbows, Bud Light, when people say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, books, libraries, Harry Potter, other people near them speaking languages that aren't English, especially Spanish, brown immigrants, vegetarians and vegans, women, especially child-free, highly educated women and women who exercise their bodily autonomy, different hair colors, when women wear makeup, when women don't wear makeup, cats, Taylor Swift, masks, mask mandates, when other people wear masks, vaccines, truth, reality, and facts, cities, the green, purple, and brown M&Ms, Disney, the Dixie Chicks, Eminem, Bruce Springsteen, Green Day, when fictional characters in movies aren't white, like Ariel in The Little Mermaid, gun-free zones, not winning elections, atheists, video games, Potato Head, and Barbie.
That is audio from a reel that someone shared on Facebook with me. Normally I'd give proper attribution, but I couldn't dig up the details for the life of me. I don't care. It's just genius. You will find a link to the reel in the episode notes. Moving ever so slowly back to the main topic, several Facebook friends have shared this, but it looks like the original post was from someone or something called Brain.Curiosity. When I was in middle school, I learned that there were only 2 genders. When I did my bachelor's in biology, I learned that there are also people who are intersex, and of the importance of the SRY gene. When I completed my master's in neurosciences, I learned that sex is already hard to define, and gender is both social and in the brain, and that everything is a lot more complex. When people say it's basic biology, they are telling you that they haven't moved past middle school. Which I'd say is about right, given the statements we hear all the time about gender identity from the masses. I will say it again, that middle school understanding of gender is just common sense, in the sense that such an understanding is extremely common. It is, of course, also wholly inaccurate. My co-host and I will take up how to change minds on that soon. But for now, let's talk about the overwhelming consensus of common sense on gender identity from most people. and the overwhelming consensus from virtually all of the experts in the fields of psychiatry, psychology, sociology, and medicine. By the way, to that end, we recently updated the useful links sections on our website, www.transtruth.info. There you will find links to the documentation from real authorities like the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. You know, the smart people who, as groups of professionals, have studied, compared notes, and made recommendations on how to understand and care for gender nonconforming people. Now, let's get into the topic of this episode, the almost universal misunderstanding of gender dysphoria and the nature of gender identity that passes for common sense. Oh, and then there are the insidious, ridiculous myths being perpetuated by those who would exploit the fear and ignorance of so many. I use the term ridiculous and myth only after careful and deliberate consideration. I mean, far be it from your Aunt Kelly to engage in hyperbole. Shut up. Who asked you? Look, ignorance is forgivable. No, really. How can we expect people to understand and respect us when we represent such a tiny portion of the population? Depending on whose study you read, we represent between 0.5 to 1.5% of the population. The Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey, which started asking about gender identity in 2021, says it's 0.95%, or about 2.3 million people. So let's use that number and say that 2.3 million out of 340 million people means that for every 148 or so people, one will be trans. Now, this is hardly scientific, but it seems to me that telling a census taker that you are trans means you are probably out. And if you are at least that out, at least some of your family and friends know. Stay with me now. Jerry Ann is the math major, but she's at the rodeo today, so we're going to have to muddle through with my English major math skills. Now, sociologists and anthropologists have a thing called the Dunbar number. The term suggests a cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain a, quote, stable social relationship. Developed in the 1990s by British anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the hypothesis holds that because of the size of our brains, the average human is capable of 150 such relationships. Yes, we're skimming over a lot of esoteric detail, so if you really want to dig into that stuff, links are in the episode notes. Anyway, given a perfectly even distribution, our 148 to 1 ratio means that if you know 150 people, there should be a trans person in that woodpile, so to speak. All other things do not be equal, of course. First of all, I am going to guess that the census number does not represent the number of trans people who are out to everyone in their circle of friends. Second of all, trans people, the out ones at least, tend to be concentrated in urban areas and blue states. Yes, doing the math on cultural demographics is probably a fool's errand, but why stop now? The red-blue mapping further skews the numbers. Now, Jerry Ann can shoot holes in my cocktail napkin statisticking, but my hunch is that most people, by far, just don't know a trans person, or don't know that they know a trans person. Now consider that modern understanding of gender identity, and especially a widespread professional consensus thereof, is only about 20 years old. That means that most adults, by far, were never exposed to anything beyond the common sense ideas of gender formed by middle school health or biology curricula. And therein lies the problem. Most people have, at best, no idea what one of those people are like. Human nature will give rise to at least some fear of a group that is so foreign to their experience. Excusable, but real. Now throw in a concerted effort by certain political groups to exploit that fear by spreading all manner of cliches, stereotypes, and outright lies, and fold in the shocking realization that schools are now teaching what the experts have figured out, and you have a cultural phenomenon that is, to say the least, stacked against us. And the Republicans and other right-wing strategists have picked up that ball and are running with it hard. I almost said Republicans and other right-wing ideologues, but that's not really what they are. Most of them don't really care one way or the other, but they know how to manipulate their base like nobody's business. By way of example, let's go back to our news story about Trump's attempt to drum trans people out of the military. The policy is entitled Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness. The irony, while it may not be apparent to the casual reader, becomes glaringly apparent when reviewing the judge's 79-page injunction against the order. First, she recognizes that together the transgender plaintiffs have provided over 130 years of service to our nation's military, and that they have earned over 80 commendations, including a Bronze Star, 2 Global War on Terrorism Service Medals, and numerous commendation medals, Air and Space Outstanding Unit Awards, and many others. In noting this exemplary service, the judge further notes that plaintiffs' service records alone are Exhibit A for the proposition that transgender persons have the warrior ethos, physical and mental health, selflessness, honor, integrity, and discipline to ensure military excellence. The injunction then observes that President Trump issued Executive Order 14183 7 days after taking office, and no one knows what he relied upon, if anything, when passing such judgment, that transgender military service is inconsistent with military readiness. I would love to go on and on because in page after page, the judge literally guts the government's arguments. But it is 79 pages of legalese, and I only bring it up to make a point in a minute. If you want a fun read, go see glad.org's summary of the action, linked in the episode notes, of course. Now, back to the point.
Finally!
All of that fear-mongering works for one reason: ignorance. As we've established, most people have never met a trans person, and human nature being what it is, they are easily made to fear that with which they are unfamiliar. In 1930s Germany, you could tell outrageous lies about Jews, and a suffering German people readily embraced those lies if the liar claimed to have a solution to the suffering. There, I said it, thus validating Godwin's law. Google it, campers. But I don't care. The Nazis built a powerful political movement by exploiting the fear and ignorance of their fellow citizens. As trans people, I guess it's just our turn in the barrel. Even though the MAGA Republicans have more than their share of racists, anti-Semites, religious bigots, homophobes, etc., blaming most minorities for this or that national ill is still out of fashion. Not so the trans community. They can accuse us of weakening our military, molesting little girls in public restrooms, and cheating in collegiate sports. Yeah, all 10 of us competing at that level. And virtually nobody calls them on it. If I was a Republican strategist and had the requisite hypocrisy and complete lack of character, I'd do the same thing because it's working like a charm. Again, in our next episode, my co-host Jerry Ann and I will dig deeper into this phenomenon and discuss / debate possible solutions. And by the way, we're open to suggestions. So if you've got an idea on how to address that common sense understanding that most people have about gender identity, drop us a line at info@transtruth.info. That's info@transtruth.info. You have been listening to Trans Truth, the podcast that speaks the truth about what it means to be transgender. If you are transgender yourself, you have a friend or loved one who is transgender, or if you are simply looking to understand more about the transgender experience, we hope that you have found this episode to be informative and enlightening. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us at info@transtruth.info. Copyright 2025, Trans Truth.